Sorry about that. Welcome to the YouTube page of a broke booktuber talking about the best books. Today we'll be talking about Brandon Sanderson, the god of epic fantasy. In Twitter, I specified I'm currently reading Elantris from Brandon Sanderson and that I wanted to comment on a video what I liked and what I didn't like about his writing. Someone took it as me saying I'm judging Brandon Sanderson the way he was 15 years ago. Simeon, I hear you. I agree with you. No one should be judged today as they were 15 years ago. So I'm actually not judging Brandon Sanderson on Elantris. I'm judging Brandon Sanderson on The Way of Kings as well as Mistborn, because I actually read his work backwards. I finished The Way of Kings. That was the first book I ever read about him. And then I just went backwards into his catalog. So yeah. And the way this works is that I will take your particular views, then I will share whether I agree or not, or, basically discuss what you just said. And then I'm going to hop from there and then share my opinion. And so, yeah, let's dive into this without any more details. So the first comment is from Mythic Jess, and he says, I adore his magic systems, world building, overarching cosmic story, use of multimedia to tell the story, commitment to the genre, pushing the genre, the arranged marriage romances get me down, the prose and the dialogue can be at times a bit flat. I do agree wholeheartedly. In fact, I agree with you on everything except one point, which is the arranged marriage romances get me down. Actually, the arranged marriage romances do not get me down in any way. I would say most of the time they are there because Brandon Sanderson has heavy influence from medieval Europe. You will notice this in a lot of his world building. There is a lot of influence from medieval Europe. And what they used to do back in those days is that they used to have political marriages. And so if you were the son or the daughter of a king, let's say the king, most likely you did not have a marriage with your loved one. You often had a marriage with someone arranged. Yeah, so like another maybe noble, a prince, maybe a very rich aristocrat. But yeah, the list continues. It doesn't really bother me much. So yeah, I do disagree on that bit, but I agree with everything else, especially the Cosmere bit, because I think there's currently very few stories in epic fantasy that are as vast-reaching as the Cosmere, because not a lot of authors are building worlds that are as extensive as the Cosmere, which is like all of these different Brandon Sanderson stories just coming together, interlocking into one. So I particularly agree on that point. I do hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Ederi Rowe, I'm not precisely certain, but the tweet is up, and if you want to pronounce the name, you can bother yourself. I'm not going to bother myself. I love the way this tweet is organized. Love and dislike. She loves original in-depth world building, adult fantasy with close narrative distance, great female characters, incredible mystery. However, this is where my particular disagreement comes from, which is she dislikes the prologues and too many POVs, right? This oftentimes I hear a lot in epic fantasy, where people will dislike prologues because they can be boring, and they will also dislike a lot of POVs because of the jarring switch. Like you have to switch from the point of view to go to another person, and oftentimes that is going to be just really awful for a lot of people, because they like to be in the scene. They don't like to be taken out of it. Now they have to put themselves in another scene, which can make reading painful to some people. Definitely it doesn't bother me a lot in any way at all, because of two reasons. First, let's talk about the prologues. Brandon Sanderson's prologues are some of the best prologues I have ever read. Let's take the Stormlight Archive, let's say the first book, The Way of Kings. It has it is infamous. It is literally one of his, when it comes to prologues, to a lot of people, the worst offender he has ever written. It has 3 prologues. The first prologue is basically, it takes place several thousand years ago, and that one, I would say, and I would agree wholeheartedly with a lot of people, that it's just boring. But the second prologue and the third prologue in The Way of Kings showcase why I particularly love Brandon Sanderson's prologues. Let's talk about the first one of these 2. There's this assassin called Sveth, right? And Sveth initially is like a slave, and then turns out he's here to assassinate the king. Now, what he does, this is not a spoiler, by the way, it's really just in the beginning. What this particular prologue does very well is it showcases the combat system, it showcases some of the magic system, and it showcases the depth of the magic system. Again, another thing I love about Brandon Sanderson. But on top of that, it also sets up and directly links and melts, I would say, I would use the word melts because that's much better. It melts into the next prologue, which itself melts into the story after that, because the king gets killed here. We move to the next prologue, where, just on a side note, it's one of the best depictions of like battles in the entirety of the epic fantasy genre. It's really scary and messy and muddied. But in this particular one, both prologues melt into one another, because now people are, going to war, not particularly for the king that has been killed, but now we see what happened before, right? What happened before has a direct effect on this particular third prologue, right? But in this third prologue, we also are introduced to Kaladin, right? And the little boy who cannot really defend himself. Kaladin is here to defend that boy, right? And so what ends up happening is that Kaladin's character is exposited to us. But you see, instead of told, it is actually shown, right? Literally, this Kaladin guy who has a very amazing squad takes this boy into his squad, who really doesn't belong there as far as it goes. And so this particular boy is being protected by Kaladin because he himself cannot protect himself, right? And this exposits Kaladin's character. So we are literally shown Kaladin's character. And then, see, this is a good trait of Brandon Sanderson. The next chapter 1, right? We see that, Kaladin is in a slave wagon, and he's, being taken somewhere. Not gonna spoil any further. This is as far as we're gonna go. Stop there. Boom. Hit the brakes. But yeah, you see, these things melt into one another. One prologue is disconnected. It is, I would say, bad. However, because it could have been done elsewhere, when it would become relevant. However, the second prologue and the third prologue are exceptional showcase of the argument for the prologue. In other words, why we should be having prologues and why prologues are good. And so, yeah, I do disagree that the prologues are bad. I actually love Brandon Sanderson's prologues a lot. Now let's talk about the POV switching. I will be brief with this one. The main reason why I don't really dislike the POV switching in Brandon Sanderson's writing is primarily because the guy is trying to write epic fantasy. It's literally in the name. I would dare someone to find an epic fantasy book out there that is really truly epic, that oftentimes has one POV or two POVs. However, most of the time, even if you find that, you will end up noticing how this story can be improved by including more POVs. Yes, because you cannot see all the story from the perspective of, let's say, one character or two characters or three characters. Oftentimes, you will need several characters in order to basically have a general view of the gist, right? The gist of the story. And so I would say for epic fantasy, I would not judge an author who writes in epic fantasy for having too many POVs. I would, however, judge them for having too many empty characters And those characters are also POV characters, right? Because if you are going to switch to a character, you better make sure that character is interesting on their own and they are someone who's interesting, right? And so that is the only time I have a gripe and a problem with POV switching. Most of the time, I would say I actually have no issues with POV switching. So we have arrived at the third tweet. It's from Jenna Glover, and she says, in the Stormlight Archive, I love his world building. The intricacies of the world play a huge part in shaping the story, but not everything included is necessary. He could cut a lot without losing quality, and I'm afraid he doesn't because he's known for long books now. Oh my goodness. Oh my God, yes. I have, maybe you don't know, I haven't taken the time to tell people watching this video, but yes, I write stories and I am a writer myself. Oftentimes, what I will start a story with is a sentence, one sentence, and I will end up with a story that has probably like 20,000 words, and then those 20,000 words will leak into more and more and more until I end up with like 150,000 words. It's a mess and I don't even know where I'm going. I remember one time I had a story start in Africa, in the Horn of Africa actually, and then by the end of it there were 5 people running in China. So this is crazy. I don't know what happened. I just happened to have arrived at that particular conclusion. Yeah. And so that is one sentence, one idea, one sentence. Brandon Sanderson, for instance, is going into the Stormlight Archive, having already announced that he intends to make it 10 books. 10 books. Oh my goodness. He started this with the mentality of 10 books. Think about it. One sentence, several 100,000 words. 10 books. 20 books. It's not gonna end up being 10 books. The Stormlight Archive probably is going to get out of control soon enough because Brandon Sanderson is going to have new ideas and new characters included that he never thought of, because guess what? That's what happens when you write stories. And so what will end up happening is that he's going to have several books, more than 10. Maybe he will end up with 15 or 16 or 17, and God forbid, for the sake of all of us, 20 books, because God help this man. And something similar has also been expressed by Hala Williams. She says, I loved them so far, but I am waiting through the Oathbringer. Can't stand all the time we are spending with Dalinar, who's just not interesting enough. And the pace and style is turgid, needs a massive edit. I will have to really disagree with this one because Brandon Sanderson has written a lot of characters over the years. I have not found a single one of those characters who is as engaging and as interesting as Dalinar. So I can see why someone might not be into Dalinar, because Dalinar is, you know, especially when you are looking at his past, because he's a character that is ludicrously far more interesting and complex than most of the characters that have been POV characters that had a lot of time and a lot of page count in Brandon Sanderson's books, because oftentimes those characters end up being flat characters. But Dalinar is actually a character who had an arc. They had an arc. They are not currently having an arc, but generally speaking, I love Dalinar so much. I didn't know that he spends a lot of time with Dalinar in Oathbringer. Yeah, I'm gonna have to finish the Way of the second book so I can get to that. Is it the third book or the second book? I'm not precisely certain, but if he spends more time with Dalinar in the future, God bless Brandon Sanderson. But I do agree with you that the pacing in the Stormlight Archive is really awful. And this is just a problem I would say it broadly applies to epic fantasy, because you have to drop a lot of information at points in the story. You cannot get around this. This will slow down the pacing. If you had a very slow pacing, this will slow it down further. If you had a very fast pacing, this will slow it down. And so info dumps in epic fantasy, which are very important for understanding the story, end up making the base of epic fantasy books really awful. And so they cannot have a pacing that is as consistent as a thriller book or a paranormal book, or let's say, a YA book that doesn't have a lot of, world building to get through, right? The next reply comes from Alexander Nidrich. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. He writes, I only read Mistborn and what we got of the Stormlight Archive, but one thing I noticed is how similar some of his characters are between stories. He goes on to detail a lot more. There is actually another reply. But yes, I agree with Alexander Nidrich 100%. Kaladin, Vin, Rayoden, all of these three main characters that I have read from Brandon Sanderson are flat and they are mostly similar. Not all of them in terms of origin, but Kaladin and Rayoden specifically, for instance, they start out as basically, very high in the social ladder. Then they drop in the mud. Vin starts out in the mud, but she climbs up. Both Rayoden and Kaladin have to climb up after they drop from, let's say, the good graces, right? After they drop to the mud, they have to run up the hill again. And this is fine. There's nothing wrong with this. However, this ends up being recycled a lot. And if you are, a fan of Brandon Sanderson, or you have read a lot of his work, you will notice that, at some point you just expect certain things. And I would say it's almost a negative in my eyes for an author to have an expectation of having the same characters. I would be forgiving and I would be expecting that the people associate a certain genre with an author, but I would be I would give an author a warning to be careful about characters and material in the genre, because you do not want to be known for the same things over and over and over, because at some point you risk becoming irrelevant. I mean, imagine 5 more characters that are like Kaladin for another 5 more series. At some point, it's just going to become the Brandon Sanderson thing, and I'm not sure if that's going to remain engaging as time changes, right? So it would be better if Brandon Sanderson writes characters that are different. So yeah, let's talk about my particular view about Brandon Sanderson as an author. I have some issues with Brandon Sanderson, and those are 2 main issues, right? The main issue that I have with Brandon Sanderson relates to his characters, because as I mentioned moments ago, a lot of Brandon Sanderson's characters fall into the flat character archetype. Now, there is nothing wrong with flat character archetype. However, I will explain to you something, right? There are 3 types of main archetypes: flat, positive, negative. Let's take someone like Kaladin and examine who he is. He believes that he should protect everyone that cannot protect themselves, right? That is his static belief, his static personality. Now let's take Kaladin and make him negative, right? So Kaladin fails to uphold this belief. We test Kaladin and then he fails, right? Test, fail. Now he has become a negative character because he has lost the truth. Let's call this particular character Negative Kaladin. Negative Kaladin maybe fails to save someone, and then that person dies. And so he's going to be like, what is the point of trying to protect these people if they can't protect themselves? And he loses the belief and he becomes Negative Kaladin. Negative Kaladin is a very interesting character because he can become Positive Kaladin. Maybe he becomes friends with someone and that person, for instance, dies protecting Kaladin, right? And then Kaladin has to ask himself, why did they die for me? The friend Kaladin gets is someone who believes that the old thing Kaladin used to believe, which was, I will protect all those that cannot protect themselves. And so when this person dies for Kaladin, or maybe dies protecting someone else, Kaladin learns again, and he decides to, become positive and adopt the truth. And maybe he vanquishes an evil. The evil likely maybe who has killed his friend, and so on and so forth, right? So you see how this dynamic can move around. This is a one character, Kaladin, believes one thing, loses it, gains it again, which is the truth. The truth every time shapes Kaladin. In the book, Kaladin upholds the truth every time, and he never fails to uphold it. And this is a really important distinction, because it means that Kaladin is a flat character archetype. The conflict in The Way of Kings when it comes to Kaladin is expressed in testing Kaladin and noticing whether he will fail or not. The bridge crew, for instance, Bridge 4, they are the perfect test for Kaladin, because will he help them or will he not? He believes that they should be helped, and that he will help them regardless whether they can do it themselves or not. He doesn't care. He will help these people. And a lot of them actually don't even have hope in life, and he helps them. But you see, there's a lot more dynamic that can be attained with a character like Kaladin. It is disappointing, because you know why? Currently I'm reading Elantris, and when I saw Rayoden, in the first beginning of the story, right, he tries to help someone who has been thrown into Elantris. But Galadin stops him, right? Galadin stops him. And at that particular point, I saw, there were flashes in my head, which is, so Rayoden is like, Kaladin. But wait. He can be someone who believes in helping people initially, but then Elantris beats him down. It beats him down, and he starts fighting for himself. Think about that. If Rayoden, I hope that's what happens. I doubt that's what's gonna happen. He's probably gonna stay flat. We know Brandon Sanderson, 100% gonna stay flat. But I want this author to do more with his characters, because there's a lot more potential for having positive character arcs and negative character arcs, and the cycle continues again. They can become more positive, and then they can be tested once they become positive. And so there's just so much more that can be done with Brandon Sanderson's characters than we ever get to see of them. And every time I read his books, I'm always disappointed, because I myself am perceiving these possibilities that can be just mined and extracted out of Kaladin and Rayoden and Finn. And so, yeah, I hope that he improves on this aspect, because he seems to be improving on these things. Again, Brandon Sanderson is someone who is very fast, and he learns very quickly. And I do hope that in the future, some of his characters get, the proper exploration that they do deserve. By the way, proper exploration that results in them changing, not in them staying the same. Okay? So the second issue that I have with Brandon Sanderson's writing is his prose, because I hate his particular prose for one reason. First of all, it's passable. It's not something that I hate. I want to rephrase. I don't hate it. It's passable. However, number two, it lacks evocation of imagery. In other words, when I'm reading Brandon Sanderson's prose, I almost feel as cold as the pages of the book. Literally, his writing is as cold as the pages it's written on. In fact, what I just said is more evocative than most of what Brandon Sanderson has ever written. That's just some random random phrase that came to my mind. But yeah, it is really as cold as the pages it's written on. It's not, he oftentimes actively, I'm not sure if it's a result of just writing too fast. Again, Brandon Sanderson is known for having a lot of output. However, I think this might have resulted in him not spending a lot of time with his prose. So yeah, I really just find his prose to be very cold and very, he stood up, he sat back, he walked to the edge of the room, or let's say he stood by the door. It's basically just factual statements. There is nothing more to it. You cannot feel the words that are written on a Brandon Sanderson book, which really oftentimes end up making me I feel like he can do way more, because this man is just genius. However, those are the two negatives. I will say the positive, right? The positive is that whatever Brandon Sanderson does well, he does exceptionally well. His plotting, his world building, and his magic systems are three things that come to my mind immediately. And these particular three aspects, he does them so well that Brandon Sanderson has become the highest reviewed author in Goodreads. If you take everything into account, The Way of Kings is the highest reviewed book in the history of all publications. It is not the most critically acclaimed book in Goodreads, only in Goodreads. It is the highest reviewed book in the world. Finally, it's really difficult to put down his books. So those are the positives, and the negatives I have mentioned before. So yeah, this has been the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, help me out. Click the subscribe button. God bless you. And so yeah, have a nice day.